And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D is our computer's eternal desktop theme. Hi, I'm Ange, and I'm a gamer. I have been a gamer since before the dawn of time, and I shall continue to be a gamer long after all has turned to dust. While I'm here, in this body, though, I'm going to talk about gaming to anyone who will listen. Or write about it, since I also run the Gnome Stew.
I'm Jared. I have rolled more dice than can be humanly comprehended. You can find my stuff at Gnome Stew and my own website, whatdoiknowjr.com. After we look at the games that we are running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about creating thematic encounters for your games. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WD&D the Role Player. Now we're going to Mac McKinney and the Morning Game with Wolfman.
So the Mind Flayer first showed up in TSR Strategic Review publication.
You know, Mac, that was the precursor to Dragon magazine.
Sure was, and it happened in 1975.
Wasn't that before you were born?
It's got me by a few years, but I'm pretty sure you were already smoking behind the gym by then.
No. It was in the basement of the school with the boiler room guy. I picked up huff and paint fumes there in my D&D habit.
Man, that guy was bad for your health.
What do you mean? D&D is great for stimulating the mind while the other destroys brain cells.
You forgot about how one will get angry moms to let you and the FBI to raid your house.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
Now, if you had a really low intelligence, Mind Flayer's Mind Blast could kill you outright. But if you had a really high intelligence, you might just go permanently insane.
So, if I was smart, I should huff paint, but if I was dumb, I should play D&D?
Got it in one, Wolfman. Riding that line of mediocrity was your best bet around a Mind Flayer. Now for another fun fact. Published in issue 78 of Dragon magazine, which was published in 1983, there was an article called Ecology of the Mind Flayer. In it, we learned that the Mind Flayer's alternate name was Illithid.
Who decided that?
Well, in the article, it was courtesy of a Githyanki hired to provide information on them. In real life, it was Roger Moore. I don't know if he was human or Githyanki.
You know, we should probably find that out there, Mac, just in case there are Githyanki out there disguised as humans spying on the planet.
Well, you know, Wolfman, that's a little bit paranoid. Besides, don't you have a pair of glasses from They Live?
Oh yeah, let me go find them.
While you do that, I'll finish up. Roger reported that Illithids aren't willing to eat the brains of lycanthropes or Grimlocks. By that logic, the safest person to have interact with a Mind Flayer would be a Grimlock wererat with average intelligence. Hey, Wolfman, you think there's going to be a Baldur's Gate 3 mod to add a Grimlock wererat into the game?
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Still no new stories from City of Cowls, though we should get to play this coming weekend. I did get to run Old Margreave, though.
Hooray!
Hooray! Yeah. When we last left the group, they were at the base of a disturbing tree fortress where Binia, an evil fairy woman, had just shot Zartath's familiar and killed it outright. They knew that the people they needed to rescue were up that tree, but they also knew that this woman's bow was deadly. Since it had been a bit since we last played, I kind of gave them a recap and how they'd been asked to find a missing family who'd gone hunting in a disturbing area of the forest. They found the kid's sister, fought off rat folk mercenaries, and then they fought a raging orc and a dryad and her awakened bushes at the base of this tree fortress. What do you do now? And all of the players stared at me. I love my players. I honestly do, but sometimes with this group, I feel like I'm constantly having to handhold them and guide them to the action, and I just kind of lost it and went, do something! It's really times like these where I empathize with Leroy Jenkins. So, Turvin the Druid, Malvern the Rogue, and Grish the Fighter all ran for the ladder that goes up the main tree. Dahlia the Ranger took up a position below to try and give them cover fire, while Zartath the Wizard and Nevrim the Warlock ran over to another tree to try and come up at a different location. The fight was probably one of the more deadly ones they've ever gone up against. They had not reserved any of their higher level spells for this. They kind of blew them all in the first fight, which made the second fight more difficult than I was expecting it to be. And then it made this fight there was a couple points where they were worried that I might TPK them. I mean, it's me. I'm Cream Puff. I'm probably not going to TPK them, but it did come close a couple of times. At the top of the tree, they faced a raging wild man barbarian and a satyr, along with Binia's deadly bow. There were also a couple of roachling minions. I actually had a few more roachling minions, hidden throughout the map. But as this fight was going on, I'm like, these ones that were inside these buildings are no longer there. It was still pretty much the same fight that was in The Adventure is Written, just the roachling minions were just two of them now, and they were really sad.
It's okay, roachlings can scurry away, so that works.
Well, as it happened, because Zartath and Nevrim went up on a different tree. Nevrim is essentially an Aasimar. I don't remember what they're called in the Midgard setting, but
Siderians.
Yeah, he basically can summon wings. So he basically helped Zartath up because we realized how slow his rope of climbing actually would be to get them up there. It like moves 10 feet around, and he needed to get up 50 feet into the tree. So Zartath basically like gave Nevrim the rope, who flew it up to the tree, and then Zartath climbed the rope while Nevrim flew over to deal with Binia. But this left Zartath in one part of the tree fortress where it was just him and the two roachlings, and they were just, he's like, come on, man. If you keep chasing me, I'm gonna kill you. Leave me alone. Flee. And I kept having the one remaining roachling roll a wisdom save, and he didn't make it until like the very end, and he's like, oh, I should probably go.
Just gonna head over here.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, oh, there's a ladder here. I'm gonna go down it and go away. Both Turvin and Malvern did drop at different points during the fight. Mal is the rogue, so he's pretty dangerous, so obviously he ended up being a little bit of a focus. And Turvin kind of made a target of himself because he heavily damaged the satyr who was Binia's lover, so she basically shot the heck out of him, and he dropped. And of course, he's the druid, so he's the healer with the healing spells, and people forgot who had healing potions and who didn't, and it was...
That never happens.
Yeah. And I mean, Nevrim flew over to the platform that Binia was on to kind of distract her, but then he failed a saving throw and was charmed. As written, he wasn't supposed to get any additional saves. It does say that if the person who charmed you or their allies attacks you, it breaks it, so on and so forth. So I'm like, I'm going to give you a saving throw at disadvantage when she attacks your friends. Because in his mind, well, she's my friend. We shouldn't be fighting. But if she keeps fighting, that's going to give him a chance to, break through. So he eventually was able to break her hold, and it didn't completely TPK the party. There was a fun moment when I had the satyr basically be like, he's going to cut and run. So he ran to Binia's room and basically was trying to run away with some of the treasure, but Zartath burst into the room with him and was basically hit him with a bunch of... Zartath is the whatever subclass is the expert with cantrips. So he was able
the cantrip adept.
Yeah, so he ran into the room, turned a cantrip into a bonus action, and just killed the satyr there. It was like, ooh, he had some cool boots. What are these? But they were able to take out Binia and the rest of them, and, so everything was defeated except the one roachling who wisely ran away. They were really enamored with the tree fortress, and they wanted to keep it as kind of theirs, but I kind of had to point out that it had a very corrupting feel and influence, and it's a distorted part of the forest. It's not clean. It would eventually hurt them if they stay, like mentally hurt them if they stayed there. So they reluctantly stayed just one night and then escorted the villagers back to Lavoka, stayed there a night, and then they set off down south, heading towards the village of Incot. And they had considered stopping at Castle Stephanstor, which is a kind of a way station on the river to collect taxes and tolls and that type of thing. on the Argent River, which runs through the edge of the forest to the city of Zobek. As they were debating whether or not to go there at all, because they'd heard some rumors about the person who runs Castle Steffenstor being a little bit on the greedy side. But as they were approaching, they stumbled across Clunk, the clockwork companion of a merchant that Dahlia had befriended. Clunk let them know that his person had been arrested for not giving the warden of Steffenstor a bribe. And that's where we left things. Dun, dun, dun. I am interested to see how they handle this one, because an all-out fight it may not be impossible, but it would cause problems, because regardless of what the warden is like, he is legally sanctioned by the city of Zobek. So there's some complicating factors there. So I'm curious to see what they do.
Now, that encounter, that tower, the treehouse and everything, is that the one where they have the giant goats that are basically the watchdogs?
I don't know. They might have. I changed it heavily from what was in the book, because I mentioned this in the previous episode when I talked about this, which was probably 2 episodes ago. The Fingers of Durende is an adventure that's in the Tales of the Old Margrave, which was the 5th edition version of the Old Margrave adventures. It's not a very good adventure. There's 3 Durende adventures, and they're kind of like, here's a thing, and they're supposed to be connected.
They're kind of adventure sites without a lot of story tied to them.
Yeah, and I didn't really like them, but at the time I was prepping for this, I didn't have the new book for Tales of the Valiant, and I made a really cool map. So I decided that I would go ahead and use it, and I would seed some hooks or connections in there to the larger evil that is a problem in the new book. I don't want to say too much. One of my players does listen. Hi, Nevram. I took a lot of it, but I didn't necessarily take all of it. And I may have missed the giant goats, because I ended up putting the dryad and the orc. I don't know if he was a barbarian. He was just an orc with a big sword and an anger management issue. Put them with a whole bunch of awakened bushes down at the base of the tree fort. Because there was a whole list of the members of this little cult that Binia had formed to basically gain power and waylay people. And sacrifice them to who knows what. I don't know.
My players snuck past the giant goats multiple times. And after that encounter was done, I had the giant goats just show up after some adventures once in a while and stare at them. Just like, there's got to be something else going on with these goats. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I completely missed the goats.
Last Thursday, our intrepid adventurers in the 2014 Midgard game made it the rest of the way out of the Plane of Shadows. Oddly enough, they did not want to take a detour and visit the Ghoul Rift, even though that was a sightseeing pleasure that they could have indulged in the Plane of Shadows.
Are you kidding? Kidding. Marin would have whined the entire time.
When they managed to leave the Plane of Shadows, they're in the jungle looking for the Dread Sultan's scholars that are researching this ruin to find out more about these artifacts that are sacred to Nidhogg. Nidhogg is the one dragon god that is kind of antithetical to the other dragon gods that are worshipped in the Dragon Empire. Kazina got a little bit of a showcase because she got to sneak up on them, and her sneaking is ridiculous, so nobody saw her. And on top of that, she got to use her insight and figure out that the scholars are not thrilled that these artifacts are dedicated to Nidhogg. And one of the scholars is literally a priest of, one of the dragon gods. So they're not thrilled about researching these things for the Sultan, and the guards and the assassins that were accompanying them are thinking, hey, maybe once they find out what they're going to find out, we just off them and take this information back to the Sultan. Kazina picked up on that.
Kazina is a 13th level rogue, so she has expertise in stealth, expertise in insight, and she also has the ability that means if she rolls 9 or below, it counts as a 10. So the
Yeah.
lowest she can get on a stealth roll is something like 24. And I think the lowest on an insight roll is 22.
The other thing I thought was interesting about this is we have two characters that have subclasses that make them telepathic, and we have a telepathic extraplanar squirrel. This sets up this unique dynamic where you can actually talk to some NPCs without talking to other NPCs while they're next to those NPCs. So they got the scholars away from camp. I did think it was funny that you failed to convince the scholars that you are agents of someone in the Dragon Empire when you are actually agents of someone in the Dragon Empire.
Well, we couldn't exactly say who we were agents of.
Yeah, but the scholars did believe that they were a little wary at first, but eventually they believed that these are at least adventurers that don't want evil artifacts out in the world. So they were going to work with them. They were going to go back and distract the guards in the camp, and while they were distracted, the PCs could go into the temple, get whatever research, can be had, make sure that nobody else can recover any of this information, and then they didn't have to worry about getting killed because they could just go into the temple and say, hey, there's nothing here to research anymore. I did like Kazina's reminder to everyone that she does not have a high charisma, which was telling the scholars that she was happy that they didn't have to kill them.
She was being honest.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we don't have to kill you.
And it was kind of chipper. I mean, it wasn't even, it wasn't grim or dire at all. The scholar that is with them, Han Katet, who was the one that first approached the Sultana in exile about doing this research and how, he could help out. He went in with Marin to this console that is very obviously a little bit more technologically inclined. The two of them were trying to work this console. They both got shocked really hard because it was a progressive skill. They didn't really fail. They just didn't roll high enough to discharge it before it zapped both of them. They did eventually get it unlocked, and they find this green crystal tablet. And at this point in time, Marin gets to make another history check to realize that Han Katet is probably a member of the Emerald Order, which is a secret society that uses information from these green crystal tablets to manipulate world events. And before they could really have the conversation about, hey, you're an agent of some, creepy Illuminati group, what does that mean? The guardian of the temple started to assemble because these armatures would come down and start putting it together. And eventually it built a 3-headed clockwork dragon. And interestingly enough, this is not a thing that will happen in a lot of D&D games, but everybody wisely ran away from it instead of just standing there and fighting because they figured that a monster that shows up should be fought. It did unfortunately catch, I forget which PC actually got hit with the fire, but I know the scholar, Han Katet, definitely got hit by it. Anytime the breath weapons overlapped, you have disadvantage to save against it. So he was, after getting shocked by the console and having the dragon breathe on him, he was quite dead. So there wasn't a reckoning about how he is part of this creepy Illuminati order anymore. Problem solved.
Bring his body back with us, though.
Yes, they did bring his body back. They did kind of like him. I mean, he wasn't like completely screwing them over. It was just, hey, you belong to this secret society. What's up with that? The dragon did not manage to catch them before they got out of the temple. As they escaped the temple, it did manage to spray them all with oil, which would have made them vulnerable to fire if they took more fire damage, which would have been really nasty if they had stayed in the temple and fought it, but they did not. They took off and wisely got out of there.
And it could not follow us through that tunnel.
It was basically bound to guard that temple. So once they were out of the temple, the dragon did not have any orders to continue pursuing them. I liked the fact that when you were getting ready to go back through the Plane of Shadows, you rolled a 1 this time on that 1d6 for how long it was going to take you to cross through the Shadow Roads. At which point I just kind of, jumped, we didn't even worry about rolling encounters for that day. We just jumped them back to being in Valera and getting ready to head back to the Sultana in exile. Then we'll be ready for the next aspect of the campaign, and everybody is 13th level now.
Yay!
Woohoo! This is getting real interesting because I'm having to really deal with high level D&D and making sure stuff is actually challenging.
I mean, to be fair, it's this, we do kind of have the end of this campaign in sight.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know how much longer you expect it to go, but I really don't know we'll get
There is at
to,
least one big off ramp that is probably going to be the off ramp that everybody kind of sees coming.
yeah. I mean, I don't know that we'll get to like much higher in level. I don't know if we'll get to like 15th. I could see us getting to 14th before, the final battle, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
do see
believe
that
with what
coming.
I have planned in between, you might get another level yet before the big confrontation happens.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be cool. I don't know what I'd get at 13th. I don't, Kazina didn't get a whole lot of new cool stuff at 13th. I don't think, at least. I mean, leveling up for Kazina was easy. I'm a 13th level rogue. Hit the button. It does all the things. Yay! Whereas all the other characters had to, like, well, Marin is like, do I take another level of artificer or do I keep going with fighter? And Karatatup and Ivy are both spellcasters, so what spells do they take? And
Fancy new
meanwhile, I'm sitting
spells.
there going, I'm done.
The rest of my career is just more sneak attack and hit points.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
D&D and similar RPGs can be a kitchen sink of tropes and ideas, all built around the idea of adventurers living in a fantasy world that they explore to their heart's content. Many of these games have tables that you can roll on to randomly generate the encounters your players run into as they tromp through the wilderness or the depths of a dungeon. But that's not satisfying to many of us, where we want a more cohesive narrative. One of the ways to get that is to build thematic encounters. And that's why we're here today. So, what do we mean when we say thematic encounters?
One train of thought is we are going to have monsters that make sense for this area according to what D&D says. So you're not just going to have really random things show up. The random encounter is going to make sense for like temperate mountain regions, if you remember all of the encounter charts that were broken down that way. A thematic encounter goes a little bit further than that. It's incorporating things that are important to the setting or to the campaign, so that even though it is a random encounter, even though it's something that may be outside of the main story, it still calls back to either that main story or to kind of the themes that are present in the campaign.
Generally speaking, I think the encounters you plan that are part of the main plot of your campaign are going to be fairly thematic for whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But you can add in additional encounters, the side quests, the random things that the players run into, and have them also be themed for what you're trying to do with this campaign, more than just, I rolled on the chart, we get some tree ants here.
Yeah, as much as I love giants, when my characters were in the mountains in the Curse of Strahd game, I'm not going to throw giants at them because it's hard to get giants to have that gothic horror feel to them. That is an example of being thematic in the opposite direction. That is something that's not going to go into the toolbox.
Well, the giants wouldn't necessarily reinforce the feel you're going for in that campaign, which is the gothic horror of you're in a land ruled by a vampire. I mean, maybe you might run. I don't want to run across a giant vampire. That'd be really bad. Is there anything wrong with random tables and just winging it?
No, there isn't. And especially when, for example, if you're running a game that is more like the Dragon Empire game that I'm running, where if I just roll on a random table that already exists for like a temperate grasslands or whatever, that's not going to break the feeling of the game a whole lot. Because even though we have some themes going on, it's also not so heavily encoded into everything you're doing that just having those normal, regular encounters that you would have in just about any campaign will throw things off track.
Yeah, with the Margrave game, I have put together a handful of random encounters that they can run into while traveling, while camping, whatever, that are just forest themed. They reinforce the theme of the campaign in that it's stuff they can find in the forest, but it's still all just random stuff to like, you're in a mystical, magical forest. You're camping. Something might stumble across you. We should probably address that. Now, here's a question. what happens if you do throw one of these random encounters at your players that you pulled out of a table and just ran with, and the players think it was part of the plot?
You take notes and then maybe tie it back in later. If it seems like it's going to be a great idea, don't rush it. Just remember it and bring it back in later. Because if you try and rush it, then it might get way too obvious that you're bending the entire reality around them to make what they thought was true. But I would say definitely take a note of it and figure out how to work it in better.
Yeah, this goes back to something else I've talked about where you don't have to add red herrings to
No.
your game because your players will make them up on their own. And the same thing is true of them coming across a random encounter and turning it into something more. Just pay attention to what your players are interested in. What are the things they're engaging with? Those are the things that you can pull back on to basically say, this was important to them. Let's make it actually important in the grand scheme of things. So what's the difference between a thematic encounter and just using regional encounters? As you said, because I remember looking through those tables of, if you want an encounter in the grasslands, here's a table.
Mhm.
If you want an encounter in the mountains, here's a table.
I will point this out. Like, we were just talking about the Curse of Strahd game and how that is much more of a gothic horror type campaign, obviously. There are random encounter tables in there. Not every random encounter table is with a ghost or a vampire or werewolves or anything like that. So there is a feeling that there are normal random encounters in Barovia, even if they're on the creepy side. What I did to kind of change that around is, instead of tying these to a dice roll, I'm having the players go around and draw cards from a Taroka deck. And based on the suit and the card, that determines what kind of encounter they have when they have an encounter. That kind of reinforces to the players that, yeah, this may just be a random commoner that we ran into, but it kind of ties into the cards and that things are lurking out there, and that, maybe the cards will turn up bad and then something evil will, run out of the night at us. So that is a little bit of a twist to just the normal, day-to-day encounters that they have in the Curse of Strahd book.
I think it's also important to note here that encounter doesn't have to mean combat.
No.
Encounter can be anything. It can be running into a traveling merchant. It can be running into a weird glade in the forest that has some weird magical stuff going on. It can be literally anything. It doesn't have to be a combat.
Yeah, and that's actually part of what I did with the encounters that I tied to the different cards, is depending on the suit that they're pulling on, it may be like an exploration encounter or a combat encounter or a role-playing encounter or a mix of them. So that's kind of tied in there too, where it's like, this card doesn't just say that you encounter this thing, it says this is the type of encounter that you're going to have too.
Technically, when Zartath got Ovi, his pseudo-dragon familiar, that was one of my random counters. I just was like, there's a pseudo-dragon in the forest who starts following them to see if one of them is powerful enough in magic to be worthy of being his master. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, dude, I'll take you on.
There's another thing that I was thinking of too when it comes to this, and it's something I've tried to do sometimes in the past. In like your old pulp stories, like Conan, or even like the Fafford and Mauser books, when you're not doing the really weird magical stuff, there is this feeling that a lot of adventuring is still weird, but it's not amazingly supernatural. So you might run into like a dire wolf or a giant snake. That's a big Conan thing right there. What I used to try and do a little bit, and I still do it a little bit now, is those lower level adventures, random encounters and such, I'm trying to still do that. Like, your opponents are still going to be like slightly weird wild animals instead of just, like a displacer beast right off the bat,
Yeah.
where it almost feels like the world is still a little bit just beyond normal before you really push into the over the top things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what are some early modules or adventures that did a good job of theming what was put in front of the players?
I think I need to start a counter, not just on when we bring up comic books, but when I bring up Dragonlance. Because A lot of the random encounters that were in like the original Dragonlance modules were very much showing you part of the story. In other words, you weren't just randomly running into goblins or hobgoblins. These were goblins and hobgoblins that had been hired by the dragon armies. You were seeing refugees that were fleeing from one of the nearby lands that had been burned down or invaded. So all of these encounters were kind of tied towards what part of this story of this emerging war is going to touch the characters next.
I highly recommend checking out Seth Skorkorski's YouTube channel, regardless. But one of the series he does is he will take old modules from first edition AD&D, second edition AD&D, and basically do a review of them. It's very spoilery because he walks through the entire adventure. But one of the things he will do is talk about how well the encounters in those adventures are pulled together or how not well they're put together. And he usually will offer advice on how to improve them to make things flow better for any given group that wants to bring it to the table. I honestly don't remember a lot of the old school adventures because we generally didn't make it too far before Tom TPK'd us. But I think a lot of these ideas about theming encounters started in some of those early adventures and modules, because it's like, here's somebody going, here's these ideas for this place, rather than just saying, hey, run some encounters, here's some tables.
Tying back to some of the stuff that we said about dungeons, if you look at the Tomb of Horrors, that is an example of a dungeon that is trying to kill you. So, I mean, it's not meant to be fair. However, thematically speaking, there's not a lot of things that are alive in that thing. There's a lot of constructs and, things of that nature, but there's not like orcs wandering around or anything like that, which kind of reinforces this idea that this is this ancient sealed tomb where everything dies.
It's probably worth bringing up that in the very beginning of D&D, they didn't put out adventures. They didn't put out modules. They put out, here's the book, here's the monster manual, here's the list of stuff. Go forth, run game. The creators of D&D, Gygax specifically, was a little surprised when they discovered other people making money creating adventures for D&D. I highly recommend Designers and Dragons. It's incredibly interesting read. There's 4 books out. The 5th should be coming soon because we're well out of the 2010s at this point. But they're very interesting, and I found that pretty insightful into how D&D was originally designed and the change that happened as they discovered people actually wanted these adventures and modules to make things easier for the GMs. Because, yeah, you've got this entire world in front of you, but how? Yeah, I'm a 15-year-old kid running games in the basement for their friends. I don't know. I just rolled some dice and pulled stuff off of tables. It gets more interesting when you have a more cohesive thread through what you're putting in front of the players.
And it's really interesting because Judges Guild were the ones that were putting out some of those first adventures. First off, I will not say anything about the people that still own Judges Guild. They're terrible people and defaulted on a Kickstarter, so forget them. But the history of Judges Guild includes a few early adventures written by Janelle Jaquays, which in a lot of ways shows that Janelle Jaquays kind of directed the way D&D went, because she wrote these adventures that were so well received that TSR had to go, maybe we should put out adventures.
Yeah. And this was before TSR earned the moniker of They Sue Regularly.
Yes.
That came
because
later.
they were still busy getting sued for using things like
Tolkien
hobbits.
And Cthulhu and I used to have a copy of that Fiend Folio that had Cthulhu in it. I have no idea what happened to it, but I had a copy.
Looking at the themes there, though, like Janelle Jaquays' adventures had a lot of heavy theming to them, too. They weren't just random things. Like Caverns of Thracia was very Greek mythology coded. The Dark Tower ones were very much based on like Egyptian and and Sumerian mythologies. So right off the bat, you're talking about like playing into certain themes instead of just randomly throwing a bunch of monsters in there.
So, what are some examples of thematic encounters outside of tabletop RPGs?
Honestly, one of the things that I loved is when you played Dragon Age Origins, you could encounter people that want to fight. You could encounter merchants, but also there were just these weird little set pieces. And once those set pieces happened, you didn't realize exactly what was going on, but they opened up something else going on. For example, there's this encounter that is basically retelling the story of Superman arriving on Earth, but it basically also means that there's like meteoric ore there that you can use to forge weapons with. Those are kind of some of the neat things that I really liked in there, and it wasn't set. Like that encounter doesn't happen when you do a specific thing. That's just a random encounter that might happen when you're traveling between two places.
I mean, if you look at The Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of the things the characters run into as they progress through the story are thematic to the area they're in at that time, and kind of putting them all through their paces.
Yeah. And also, the other thing is there's a lot of world building there too, because, hey, why are all these spiders so creepy and kind of seem like they're somewhat self-aware? Is there like some giant spider that's even bigger than all of these things? It's this horrible, horrible thing that they're going to run into later?
Oh.
Speaking of video games, though, there's something, the Gloomhaven, it's a video game version of a board game. But there's a neat thing that it does with its random encounters that I kind of want to play with now, which is random encounters usually aren't like a full fight or anything. It's a situation where it asks you, do you do this or do you do this? And based on which one, you either get something or you have something taken away, or you start with a disadvantage or an advantage where you're going. That's kind of an interesting thing. And it is very tied to, like where you're going next. So like you run into these bandits before you get to the bandits' lair. Do you chase them now or do you wait until, to finish them off later? So it's more of a decision point than it is running extra things.
I've been replaying Pathfinder Kingmaker, mostly because I started trying to play Rogue Trader and was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know that I like this world. I'm just going to go back to Kingmaker because I know I like the game and I'm just going to play that. And they do this interesting thing where some of the locations you go to that are encounters, rather than just being an open zone, are basically a story thing you have to go through. Basically, you're presented with the text of what's going on. You're presented with the options, some of which have skill rolls attached to them. And you go through these. It's a choose your own adventure inside of the video game for these particular locations or story moments in the game, rather than playing out graphically like you would expect in most other video games. It's actually kind of neat.
Yeah, I think that's kind of similar to like, what I was talking about with the Gloomhaven thing there, where it's like, it is a story.
Yeah.
But you're choosing how to do this next, but not engaging the full rule set.
Hey, Jared, how big is your theme?
Here's the thing. Do you want your theme to just be a general thing? Like, for example, when all of you are in the 7 cities, I want to make sure that a lot of the random encounters are still things like mercenaries running around, because mercenaries are all over the place in the 7 cities. But that's kind of thematic to the area you're in. But you can go bigger than that, like I said with the Dragonlance encounters, where you are tying these encounters into foreshadowing things that are going to come later in the campaign. When they first set out of Solace, they do not realize that half the continent has been conquered and there's this massive war going on. They just know there's bad stuff that they have heard whispers of. And all of those random encounters where you're running into refugees or where you're running into mercenaries that have been hired by the dragon armies. The thing about the mercenaries, you don't know about the dragon armies yet, except that they're talking about the people that hired them to do this stuff. It's all foreshadowing this bigger war that you are going to get involved in. That is a much bigger theme to tie into your encounters than just, hey, there's lots of mercenaries in this area. Make sure a lot of the encounters are mercenary themed.
I think you can kind of treat this type of thing as the breadcrumbs leading to the larger theme of your campaign. And like, it doesn't even necessarily need to be the larger theme of the campaign. It could be the larger theme of this arc and what's
Yeah,
going to get
yeah.
you to the next section. But it's the type of thing you can build up to where you can start dropping these hints of things that are going along. Like the players in the old Margrave game have now heard of the Weft of Shadows twice. So it's dropping that idea in that the whatever this Weft of Shadows is, they have manipulated at least two different groups into doing kind of these evil things in these parts of the forest. So what's going on here?
And also, I think Waterdeep Dragon Heist is another thing that has some of that thematic encounter building in it, because depending on what season you pick, you have a different main villain, but it also changes some of the in-between events that happen as you are progressing towards that main villain too.
I like Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It is not an adventure for the faint of heart because there are sections of it that are a little hard to follow. I recommend it with cautions.
And that's an instance where, even more so than I think the book does itself, if you want your players to engage with all of the faction stuff that they put in there, you should probably tie a lot of your random encounters to factions so that they're getting the idea that these are the groups that are pushing things one way or the other. And if you want something to change in the city, maybe you have to engage with them.
Also, maybe in your session 0, have your players choose to be part of these factions. Unlike somebody who ran this campaign, and my players didn't give two craps about any of the faction stuff because none of them were part of the factions except the one player that didn't give a crap about the faction she was in.
Ouch.
That's the player I had to remind. You're a paladin indebted to the Lord's Alliance. If you steal this gold, you break your oath. You're no longer a paladin. You might want to think about that. Oh, fine, we'll turn it over to them. Sorry for making you roleplay here. Are monsters or NPCs the only things that play into themed encounters? We kind of started talking about this.
You don't even have to have like a role-playing encounter be what's foreshadowing things or what's telling you the story of an area. One of the things that I thought was interesting, when I ran Shadow of the Demon Lord, when you start a campaign in there, you kind of determine what the end of the world looks like and, you know, all of the signs of it. So there are basically like these things saying like, during the first tier of play, these are the kind of things that start happening that tell you that things are going to crap. These are the things that escalate when you get to this level. And that gives you some like role-playing things that aren't necessarily people showing up. It's things like, why is the rain black and burning through my skin? You know, it's telling you something is coming up. Maybe go research this, but it's not something you can really engage with other than noting that it's happening and surviving it.
Yeah, you can totally have environmental things be part of the theme that you're leaning towards. When I was running the Depths of Zendrick game to reinforce the kind of broken, wild magic that is rampant in Zendrick, there were locations that they basically stumbled across that were full-on encounters. There was just no combat. There was exploration, and there were saves to avoid becoming asleep in this beautiful glade forever.
When we were playing Princes of the Apocalypse, the longer we went on, the more there was a chance that one of the elemental cults was going to do something bad. And we were taking long enough to explore the dungeons that something bad happened, which is basically they set off one of their elemental orbs, which is sort of like a nuke that is focused, you know, a focused version of that element. So like if it's the earth element that goes off, it's basically like, you know, blowing up a mountain underneath something. Or
now here's the question. Did you know that there was some sort of ticking clock going on?
Not necessarily, other than the fact that people, you know, the DM was role-playing the fact that people are saying, hey, these cults are obviously doing something. They might be saying things like people are getting kidnapped, or, you know, we're finding, you know, these weird signs of these rituals. So it was kind of an escalation where it's like, no, this isn't the standard thing where I'm going to keep saying stuff is happening, but it's not major. Like, you just lost a city because you didn't, move fast enough. Not that we
Yeah.
would know what that is like.
I mean, what Chris did to us was a little more immediate. I'm not going to say anything more because other folks might not have listened to all of Heroes of Holloway, but then I'm going to give you a side eye and ask why not. I ask that because that is one of those areas that I can see things going sideways for either the players or the GM or the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah.
Because I know plenty of GMs who are like, they didn't do the thing I wanted them to do. And then you find out they didn't really plant the hook well enough for the players to understand that that was the main hook they were supposed to be following or how important that main hook was doing. And then you lose an entire city because the players did the wrong thing. And that, to me as a player, is super frustrating. I do probably telegraph a little more as a GM than others would want, but at the same time, I'm like, I want the players to understand if they're the main characters in the story, they should know what's important coming up. Or
I also
where
think
dangers are. And this isn't to say you can't do a thing like you can go here or here, but you're sacrificing something, choosing one or the other.
Yeah, it's just people should understand the actual stakes that you're presenting them with, though.
Yeah.
This is actually a good place where I think the fronts from Dungeon World are a good thing to look at, because the way the fronts worked was like, here is a major thing that is a theme of the campaign that is going to happen. Whenever there is a random encounter, there are like 3 different phases underneath that thing. Once those 3 things have happened, the next time there's a random encounter, it means that front is now blown up, and that is a thing that is happening now. If your players know what those fronts are, even if they don't know exactly how many steps there are to that front, that is giving them that idea that, this is important. We know that when, if we screw around long enough and we roll a random encounter and it's one of these things, it's going to start ticking towards this clock of this other big thing happening. So we need to make sure that we're not just randomly doing stuff and wandering around and not being focused.
And this is not to say that your players may choose to go do the dumb things because they think it's more fun. No matter how much you're trying to say, hey, plot in this direction, important stuff, world-shattering events in this direction. And they're like, we want to go to the tea house in that city. It's like, come on, my people.
Yeah, that's where you have to decide whether or not you do want everything on a ticking clock, because I do like my players having some downtime. Like, I like inside a certain story arc for there to be the ticking clock, but I want in between those arcs for there to be time for you to actually live and be a character and not just always be on the run.
Right. Let's boil this down. What are the benefits of using a thematic encounter in our game?
The funny thing about this is, if you come up with a general theme and your players can see that theme, even if you're just doing the lightest touch of things, like there's going to be a pirate invasion, so I want there to be, pirate random encounters. That's just a thing I'm throwing out. That was probably a terrible example, but the point is, if they see any kind of pattern, it starts feeling like this was all planned. It's all tied together.
Let them believe in your genius.
Yeah, you put a thin layer of paint on something to make it look like it's part of the pattern, but you did make it look like it's part of the pattern.
Yeah, I mean, it reinforces the narrative whole of the game, making it feel like it is a story that these characters are in, rather than just, hey, we're getting together to roll some dice, folks. Whatever happens, happens, and it doesn't matter. That type of game is perfectly fine, if that beer and pretzels type of game. But I think more of us are here wanting a little bit more crunch in our story and for our characters to matter in that narrative. Even if you just do the lightest coat of paint to theme that encounter to the world your characters are in and what they're dealing with, that can really work.
It goes the other direction too. I made the joke about how this is just a random encounter that I put a coat of paint over so it looks like it's part of the theme. You can definitely do the other direction where it's like, no, this is definitely part of the theme. I am definitely planning for them to see that this thing is in the world now and they have to deal with it.
Mhm.
That's the other side of the coin. So I don't mean to just say like, yeah, just randomly do things and make it look like it. You can very intentionally plan these things out and put them into the game to reinforce that stuff that's coming up later. You could throw a ring of invisibility into a thing that turns out to be an artifact that can actually control all the other people that have rings across time.
That brings us to kind of our final part of this whole topic. What are the elements of a good thematic encounter?
Sort of like when we have talked about secrets, and if it never makes it to the table, it didn't happen. You can have a theme in your head, but if it's not obvious to the players, you didn't really provide a theme for that encounter.
Mhm.
All of these bandits are wearing purple. Do you get it? No. No. Why? Because they forgot that, purple was associated with a certain cult that you mentioned 3 sessions ago. So you might need to be a little bit more obvious about it.
I know a GM who, he's not a bad GM, but he likes putting that type of thing in his games. And then when the game is done, he sits there and lectures you about how brilliant he was at putting all of these things in his game. My dude, if the players didn't get it during the game, it probably doesn't matter. We don't need to know that you referenced this really old song in this part of it. Yeah, okay, that's okay, whatever. I'm leaving now.
And I mean, that goes back to like some of the discussions we've had about older school ways of running games versus newer school ones. If you do have a thematic encounter where it's like this giant, tentacled creature with bat wings flies out and you have to fight it, and people are like, where did that come from? Remind them you had a dream about this thing 2 sessions ago. Remember, back when you saw this thing threatening so and so. Don't just assume they're going to remember it, and don't get upset if they don't remember it.
Players' memories are horrible. Absolutely horrible. There's a reason you as the GM should do some sort of recap at the beginning of each session, even if it's just asking the players, what do you remember about where we left everything? That's probably a whole other topic.
When you guys ran into the Thac0 giants, I wanted you to remember that Minotaur artificer that you bought stuff from a few sessions earlier, because, I wanted the idea there that, like, this poor, nice Minotaur woman that just wanted to learn how to make magical things is being chased by these big, mean giants. And
I think we eventually remembered.
Oh, yeah.
They mentioned a Minotaur. We're like,
oh yeah. They brought her up.
Yeah.
They brought her up just to make sure. But again, that's what I'm saying. Like, I made sure they mentioned this Minotaur that stole magic items, and she's probably selling them, just to make sure that you did remember that. And it may seem a little on the nose, but we're playing a game. Not everybody is trying to, take notes and remember deep lore. Make sure that since this is a storytelling game, you include story connected to your game.
Respect the competency of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
The characters live in this world. They have chosen to be adventurers. They're not stupid. Even the ones that have an 8 int. Remind the players when something comes up that their character should know or remember. And that includes the stuff you add into your encounters that leave those threads that go to other parts of the adventure they're on. If you do an encounter that is connected to something they run into later on, drop that hint. Find a way to say, hey, you remember seeing that symbol on the armor of the guys you fought 2 sessions ago. However many of these elements you weave together for an encounter to bolster the rest of the campaign, you may need to just drop some hints, drop some hints to your players.
The other thing I would say is, we've mentioned this before, but if your players do start connecting dots, and I'm not necessarily saying like specific dots, like, Lord so-and-so is the greatest villain in the entire continent, but just general things like, I think the mercenaries in this country are talking about taking over. Pay attention to those things. They don't have to become your A plot, but they can definitely become your B plot. You can flesh them out and build that sub-theme up a little bit more with some encounters. And you can tell a B plot with encounters without having the main adventure ever actually go to that B plot.
Dove was still right about the mayor being the ebon cowl. I'm still surly about that one.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, the listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. However, first, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon. We would like you to help us do this show, please. We would love to provide you with additional content, and we would love it if you would join. You can hang out with us on our Discord. You'll get stuff from us. We'll talk to you. We'll probably talk to you even if you aren't our patrons, but we'll talk to you especially if you are our patrons. On top of that, I am reiterating my promise to hex anyone that you want me to hex if you become our patron.
It is the month of August, which means on our Discord, I am currently dropping threads about the RPG a day prompt conversation starter. And we've had some pretty good conversations in there about the various things that I've taken out of the prompt list.
So if you want to become our patron, please visit us at patreon.com/Thac0WA.
One of my favorite conventions to attend is UConn near Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's held in November, and it is somewhat at the whim of the college football schedule, so it does change which weekend it's on every year, but they do try and get it into November every year. It gets about 1,000 attendees, and I find it to be a very well put together convention that I try and make every year. Other than a poor choice in 2018 and the pandemic kerfluffle, I have attended every year. So if you are in the region or willing to travel to the region, I highly recommend it. Badge registration will open on August 23rd, and event reg opens for everyone on September 6th. We'll have a link to their main website in our show notes. Oh, and just as a random tidbit, UConn stands for University Convention, not Connecticut. It started as a college con, but ended up going independent a bit over 10 years ago when they ran into some issues with the event management people at the university. And they're like, well, we've already invited people to the con. Let's go find a location for it.
So I don't think we've had a chance to talk about all of the Daggerheart Darrington Press Critical Role news that came out of Gen Con, so I just wanted to drop that in here before we got too far away from it. Here are some of the highlights. There was a lot going on. There's going to be a Romantasy campaign frame called With Love and Magic coming out in 2026 for Daggerheart. Daggerheart has a world coming out that is going to be designed by Eberron's Keith Baker and Jen Ellis.
Yes.
Jeremy Crawford is working on something described as a hellishly terrifying product. Chris Perkins is working on something that is said to interconnect campaign frames into a wider adventure. And no big deal, Brennan Lee Mulligan is the GM for Critical Role Campaign 4, which will be set in a new world, not Exandria.
No big deal. No big
deal.
I'm actually pretty excited to see Matt as a player.
I know. The few times I've gotten to see him as a player, he's been a lot of fun.
And, you're going to end up seeing in real time whether or not he can refrain from backseat GMing. Because even in that little thing they did with, adventure on a bus or whatever it was.
I was about to bring that up.
Matt was still trying to help push the adventure forward. There was no adventure. There was a plastic bus and a ball of lint. And he's still trying to offer her on-roads to making it a real adventure.
I love that because Brennan looked at him and said, "You're trying so hard to make it to where there's an actual story here, aren't you?" So you can find the link to that news page on Darrington Press's page in the show notes. And you can check out anything that I might have missed because there was a lot going on there.
We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast, like
The Heroes of Hobble's Way. The Heroes of Hobble's Way is an epic fantasy story about two young heroes, Odie and Aramon. These heroes have the potential to deal with a dire threat from an ancient time that is poised to return to the world. A Titan destroyer, Valhall Morris the Mountain Strangler, stirs. The fate of the Barony of Castican may be in their hands. We play the game to find out. We invite you to join with us in this journey.
We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.